Okay, so could you please state your full name and spell your last name for me?
Vermelle Bunny Rodrigues. Vermelle is spelled Vermelle. Bunny is Bunny. Rodrigues is Rodrigues.
S and not Z.
And not Z.
So when were you born?
A long time ago. I was born on April 1938. So
Okay.
that makes me 74 years old, and I like to brag. This is I'm going on 75.
And where were you born?
I was born in Georgetown, South Carolina, a coastal community on the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay. Were you born in a hospital, in a house, or?
No, I was born in the house.
Okay.
When I was born 74 years ago, I got the name Bunny because Bunny is actually what the West African family consider a basket name. A lot of times the plantation owners thought that they would be giving us a name, but in West Africa they would always give a child a name that could use within the family unit. So when I was born 74 years ago and moving around in a box, my oldest sister said she moves like a bunny rabbit. So that's how I got the name Bunny. But what they did, they would name you after animals, plants, the day of the week, or the month, the name of a month.
And so how was Bunny selected for you specifically?
Because I was moving in this
Nice.
box. And she
right,
says
right.
I was moving like a bunny rabbit. So I guess I came here jumping around.
So what do you consider your ethnic or racial background to be?
Actually, I'm African American,
Okay.
and I also have some Native American blood on each side of my family. My great-grandfather on my father's side, Bubba Ed, was a black Cherokee, and we have Indian on my mother's side.
I see. That's did your family talk about that a lot when you were growing up?
Yes, they did, because we had Bubba Ed, and he was such a distinguished-looking man. I'd have to show you his picture. I have it in one of the books down there. And we always just proud of Bubba Ed, because that's our Indian grandfather, great-grandfather. So we always embrace that side of Native American side of the family.
I see. And so where did you grow up? Did you grow up near where you were born?
I grew up right in Georgetown.
Okay.
Near the ocean, the creek, that's mean creek, and the river.
I see. What was it like to grow up there?
It was fantastic because we were always, I'm from a very large family. There are 10 children. My parents had 6 girls before the first boy came, and it seemed like everybody else on the street had boys. So we grew up like tomboys. We were always in the creek or in the ditch looking for crawfish, what we call poggy-woggies. They were tadpoles, or looking for minnows, and that type thing. Find raw bird nests. And we also had another habit that I'd go snake hunting. So we did all of those things that little children did in a small southern town. These were exciting times, and just all of those things that, that I still love to do, but I can't.
Fair enough. So where have you lived?
Oh, I lived in Detroit, Michigan. When I was a little girl, I went there for 2 years. And after I got married, I lived in Boston. My husband is from Boston. And we lived in Pennsylvania. And we lived in Maryland. So I sort of lived up and down the East Coast for a while.
No, sounds that way. And where do you currently live now?
Currently, I'm back in God's country. When I lived in the Northeast, I never complained because I knew that when my husband retired, we were going to do the Ruth and Naomi thing. He was going to come and live with me. So we moved back to Georgetown about 14 years ago and opened up the Gullah Museum there.
I see. What can you, well, here, let's see. Who are your parents? What were their names?
My mother's name was Anna Simmons Manigault, and my dad's name, my strong name, Edward Smith. That's my maiden name is Smith.
Smith.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And when and where were they born?
Both of them were born in Georgetown.
Okay.
And their families, they have been there for as long as we could think, as far back as we can. Because I don't know my great-grandfather on my mother's side, but we have his cobbler bench. He was a cobbler making shoes in one of the plantation. Mm-hmm. And then on my father's side, it was Bubba Ed. I really don't know what Bubba Ed did, for a living after he left probably the plantation. But they have stayed there, and my grandmother stayed there, and both my grandparents, and then my mother and my father stayed there. So they always stayed in that general area. They had good jobs. Like I said, my grandfather was a cobbler, so he wasn't a sharecropper even after he was born a slave. But after slave, he didn't. He just I guess did that on the side. Then he had one brother that now we think that he probably came to Florida because he said he left. Doing slavery, he left Georgetown. And when you would leave Georgetown, everybody thought that you were going to Charleston. Why would you go into Charleston? No one never heard about him, and no one couldn't find him in Charleston. So I think that he probably headed towards Jacksonville because a lot of people in Georgetown, I have an uncle that I'm going to look for. Well, he passed away a long time ago, but his children have also passed away, so I have to look for those descendants. But as long as I could remember myself, and I didn't know why people would leave Georgetown and head to Jacksonville instead of heading north. So this is something that I really think that I'm going to try to help bridge that gap between the families who have left there and settled in Jacksonville. And yesterday, as I was talking to people, most of those families came out of South Carolina, and especially that lower part of South Carolina, like the Low Country. So this is very important. And I think we need to adopt Jacksonville as our sister city, because now I know why they came. They had been coming since 16 or 17 something, going south, going to the Jacksonville area.
So how did your family come to live in Georgetown?
How they did what?
How did they arrive in Georgetown to begin with?
As long as I could remember.
So that's
they
basically
have lived. I don't know whether you know it, but this has something to do with Florida too. Mm-hmm. The first blacks came into the United States in 1526. They landed in the Georgetown area, which is the PD area, is documented in the Spanish ship logs. There were some Africans with them. They were mistreated. So they left the ship. They went into the forest with the Indians. And that particular winter, it was a very harsh winter. And 150 of them were left because they had one of the first slave rebellion was in the shores of South Carolina, in exactly where I'm from. And then 150 of them were left Spaniard, and they came to Florida. Now, this information they got into the ship log, so you always had that connection with South Carolina, and within that PD, the Georgetown area, and Florida. I didn't know whether you knew that.
I did not.
So you have to look it up. It's
Yeah.
documented. Yeah, we've been here. And last year, one person was doing a research, and they had a big celebration in Georgetown because he said, I taught history for 40 years, and I never realized that the first African did not come here and enter Jamestown. They entered Georgetown. And every probably 5 or 6 years, they might get enough money that they try to do, look for places that they have landed to find artifacts and whatnot. But that's how long the Africans have been on the coastal part of South Carolina.
Well, so who's the oldest ancestor of yours that you know? How far back did the family histories go?
I knew my great-grand-uncle.
Okay.
My great-grandfather's, his name was Henry Manigault, and he stayed in the Georgetown area. They did migrate. Like, since a lot of people migrated up north, they didn't. And I guess that when I went north, I always told them I was a saltwater Geechee gal. And I really didn't complain about the weather or some of the things, because I knew that when my husband retired, I was going to come back and live near the creek, the river, and the ocean, which I call God's country. I like to smell the salt water. I like to smell the marsh. I just like other places. The mountains in Pennsylvania were just gorgeous and whatnot. I could just go any place and enjoy it. But I feel at home and breathing in the marsh air.
I can understand that. Well, so did your family talk a lot about slavery, or talk much?
Well, sure. I met Grandma Williams, but I didn't ask her whether any of them came down to Florida. Well, I was about 12 years old when she died. And it was just that she was the only person that I've ever met, other than my great-granduncle, that was an enslaved African. My granduncle, well, he still lived out in the country, so we never really talked to him. But Grandma Williams, and we lived on the same street. And she would have all of the children, just like she did on the plantation. We would just sit around and hear her tell stories about what she did and so forth. One of the things that she talk about, which I do sell, like sometime I add 13 bean soup or 15 bean soup, and she said how it started is that she was a cook on Keithfield Plantation. So what they did when they would every time they had beans and peas and whatnot, they would take a handful, stick it in their pocket, and then they would go out to the slave village and drop it in a container. So when they got enough, then they would make a large pot of soup. And she said we even would pull the cotton off of the seeds out of the cotton. Have you ever seen cotton seed? I said that would take a little time, because it's a little seed to pull all of that cotton, and they would make it, throw that in the pot too. Sometimes they made cotton seed soup. They came here because of their agricultural knowledge, and they knew how to do an awful lot of things, make use of things. And she would tell us stories about that. So I have 15 bean soup that I said to Grandma and tell her how it got started. And then she would say, she would tell us, one of the little cute things she would tell us, it's cute and it isn't. And she says, if someone did something on the plantation, they were being punished. And so we knew about all of the herbs and the spices and some of the stuff. So they knew exact what herbs that they could use that the person would have diarrhea. So whenever when it was time for them to be whipped, she said they would drink that solution, because they know they're going to get a whipping the next day. And when you would be tied up there, and the first time they'd give you, the way she said, and they'd give you a lash, you know what's going to happen. Because you're all excited, and all of a sudden you stop, because they said, no, they can't, because it's going all over the place. And we would just be laughing. That's Grandma Williams. And, she would tell stories like that. And she would tell us ghost stories, too. And it was good for one to tell one about the hags and the hants and whatnot, and especially when it's a rainy day, we just run over to Grandma's and sit on the porch, and she would tell us these stories and whatnot. Because she went to sleep early at night, so we didn't get those nighttime stories.
I see.
But she never talked about, whether the enslaved Africans would, run to Florida or whatnot.
Okay.
But I know they did, because the one in Georgetown, Caribbean, he was Joseph Morini. They owned slaves. I think they owned 2 or 3. And during the Civil War, he went to Bermuda. Then after the Civil War, Joseph Morini came back to Georgetown, got into politics, went to state politics and the federal. He was the first black representative in the United States Congressman. His name is Joseph Morini. And here he was actually marooned down to Bermuda. And where he lived in Bermuda, I think right now they have a place that you call Rainy Alley or Barber Alley or something, where he had set up his barbershop. So you still have that. Now that is a connection that we know exactly who it is and what family. Some of the descendants of the Rainy family, they are Thayers, and they lived somewhere in Florida, because I met them. We have some of the descendants that live outside of Georgetown. Right now, one have sort of just moved back there through a marriage. But I guess some of them, he had enough money to, when he escaped, to go to Bermuda to set up a barbershop. And came back. Became our first black representative in Congress. Isn't that remarkable?
It is. It is.
So we probably just need to dig into some more families probably could actually pinpoint a relative that probably did that, I'm quite sure there are not too many of them came back and was
well
a United States congressman, but he did.
But that
Yes.
movement, yeah.
Yes, he went to Bermuda.
Well, so
All the way from South Carolina.
So how
he got to Bermuda?
No,
I don't know, but he got to Bermuda. Well, I'm going to tell you, he was very fair. I wonder whether, a lot of us pass, that. Mm-hmm. To see a picture of him. I want you to look him up. He's the first representative, okay? And he was very, very fair. He could pass any time for white in the southern states. We turned, when my husband came to Georgetown, he wanted to know whether those people were, knew that they were light-skinned. He said, were they white or black? And I said, no, everybody down here turned dark. And so Georgetown used to be 95% black. Charleston was 80, Beaufort was 85. At that one time, South Carolina was 80% black. And this is why we came to Florida. You'll find a lot of us in Florida and a lot of us in North Carolina. Because when they would leave, they would go into the Wilmington area. And they didn't go that far north. Like the ones from Kentucky, they would go to, in Virginia, they would go into Canada and whatnot. But we do have, they weren't runaway slaves, if you want to consider them. They left with the British Army. They left with Cornwallis. Mm. And we ran Cornwallis right into Virginia. And then they ran him out of Virginia into Nova Scotia. So in our presentation, we always say the blacks, with 85% of the African American who live from Florida to Nova Scotia are descendants of Gullah people. Out of South Carolina, that's where they had the bulk of them came in. I don't know whether you know, but 45% of them enslaved African came in through Charleston.
I knew it was a lot. I didn't
45%.
That's a lot.
So that's almost half that came in through Charleston.
Wow.
And we also have, a slave market. Now they call it the Rice Museum. And I didn't bring it, but I have some old postcards. Probably I need to send it to you. The slave market in St. Augustine, Florida.
Oh.
I wasn't thinking. I don't know when I sent the book up to my daughter. But a picture, some postcards. Because that was just pretty big in the day to send these pictures with old slave markets.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. You'd find all of these up north. That's how I got them. He said they would come north, they would come south and pick up these cards and derogatory, all these things, and send it back north. That's where all of the things are, especially Pennsylvania. Rice's Market, the ones up there and Dutch Country. Can't think of it right now. A Perkiomen, well, that one too. Well, that's right in around Philly, not too far from Philly.
Lancaster?
Yeah, the one in
Is that
Lancaster.
what you're thinking of? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I used to do black collectibles.
I see.
As a matter of fact, I have some Seminole dolls, and I got those in Pennsylvania. These are very, very old Seminole dolls. But, they always came and bought souvenirs to take back up north.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it has a lot of old Seminole cards, too. Yeah. So for a very, very long time, I've never been to St. Augustine. I've been to Jacksonville. And it's just an honor to be here, to think about all the times I study, and it's the cats today, talking about the black Seminole and the black Indians. And here I am on my own, where all of it, well, I guess all of it started because when they left South Carolina, most of them, this is where they came. From Jacksonville in the St. Augustine area. And from then over to the Caribbean and Mexico, because I have an article that a lot of them, they were out there in Texas and Mexico, and they thought that they were speaking Seminole, and it wasn't. It was Gullah. Like,
interesting.
Dr. Pratt, I was telling her, and all of them were so happy to even be around them, because, see, I don't know whether you know it or not, but the Gullah people will drop the H. When Turner did his work, he found out when he came back that the Gullah people, that Gullah was a language, and when he came to South Carolina, that's when he found out about Gullah, because he did his work doing some summer stunt at South Carolina State. At that time it was South Carolina State when I was there. It's a university now. And he heard the student from Georgetown, Charleston, and Beaufort, because we always stuck together, because people says that we were Gullah Geechee, we rice-eating people, and, what have you, And here, where we were the people that kept the culture, kept the language. And Turner, when he listened, and he said, that's not incorrect English, broken English, or bad English. That is a language. So he followed one of the young guys to Charleston. And then he went to a seminar. And at the seminar, they were doing a study on different dialects. Now, I have his book with me. The name of the book is Africanism in the Gullah Dialect. So he chose the Gullah dialect because he was African American and he had been exposed to it. So then he went to London to study the West African languages, and then from London he went to Africa. When he came back to America, he said that the Gullah people were speaking an African grammar, syntax, and word order. And I'm going to use this as how, and I want you to listen to me closely. And I bet you some of the Seminole people, black Seminoles, are still doing it to this day. And I use this as an example. We'll say, "E cracky teeth." That means to speak. I said crack, because you're going to have to open up your teeth. You say cracky teeth, a unraveling your mouth. Both things unravel to open, to speak. Or we might, if we were counting, we will say 1, 2, 3 instead of 3. We will say, I'm thinking about something. And I use this one all the time. And we'll say, when I was a little girl, I'd hear the old folks in church. They would say, thank God for waking me up this morning in my right mind. And I'd go home, being smart. I says, Mommy, why can't they say, thank you, Lord, for waking me up this morning in my right mind? Well, now I'm 74. You know what? I'm also thanking God for waking me up in the morning in my right mind. And we'll say swimp instead of shrimp. Now, when the African were captured, and there was no such thing that the overseer taught us, baby talk, overseer teach 30 or 40 different tribes, a nation of people on a plantation. They said we were doing it so the owner wouldn't understand what we were talking about. Gullah started when we were captured on the continent of Africa. They would be between 16 to 75 different tribes and nation of people. They couldn't understand each other. These people were highly intelligent, not savages and barbaric. They said, we have to put some words together so that we'll be able to communicate with each other. We'll be able to help each other. And when they were putting these words together, it was a sound. I did not pronounce one alphabet. The sound was never there at that time. And I did not pronounce the H. I said Shri instead of three. I said tank instead of thing. I said swimp instead of shrimp. I said tink instead of think. And this day, I would like for you or anybody to listen to an African. He will drop the H. And you've noticed that the aspera, that downstairs there, they say they're thinking about something in tank. All of us. I'm bilingual. I could get excited now. And I will drop that H. And we, like any other ethnic group have ever come to this country. You speak your own tongue, you begin to add English words. But if you lived in South Carolina in those 3 counties, did you have to add that many English words? No. 80% black. And most of the white people, if they've been in the Charleston, Georgetown, or Beaufort area for over 200 years, if they would be in a room and you didn't go to see who it was, you would know whether they're white or black, because they also speak Gullah. So I want you to start listening to the Now I have to go over and talk to the Seminole. Now I met some Seminoles about 8 years ago, and I had a little trouble following them. But if you have to listen, and then I began to put what they were saying together, you know. So it's a mixture of whatever Indian and African. But when they thought that they were actually speaking Seminole, it was Gullah. So that's something that held us together, making us one out of many, one people.
Well, so did you grow up thinking of yourself as Gullah, or thinking of the area as Gullah, or what?
Oh, I knew it was. I've always been a history buff.
Oh.
From church and a Sunday school and all that Bible thing. I always like to know about places and things. That's why I was so happy when I had my first class in geography. But the thing about it, I was brought up in a segregated school system. Mm-hmm. When I was coming through, they were getting us ready for integration. And even before then, it was no difference than a missionary, white missionary, going out west and telling the Indian, you cannot speak your language. You could not say any Gullah words. But when I was coming up through elementary school, we had 2 recesses. The big recess and a little recess. And then after school, we would speak Gullah to each other. But I started noticing this Gullah thing when I was probably about 7 or 8 years old. There were 2 little boys that came, some of my cousins that came from the backwoods of Georgetown. And it went like this. He said, MJ, he said, wait, look for, he said, Stack, what you doing? He said, Spike, about the water tire. He said, I'm going to interpret it for you. He said, MJ, he said, what? What do you look for? What are you looking for? He said, stick. What are you going to do with him? What are you going to do with it? And he said, spank him. That means he was going to hit it. On what? On what? The tire. Now, we call these people, and I want you to probably find out as you're doing your research work, and when you come to the Seminole, whether you have some Seminole that speak very fast and very choppy, just like the different languages and the sounds in Africa. And this is why a lot of times people said, oh, they were barbaric, they were jungle-like sounds, because these were different languages that they were speaking. Now, we used to always hate to go up in the country to visit these cousins, because we call them what you say cousin, because you have to ask them what you say at least 3 or 4 times. Not like I just said what you say you'd have to say, "What you say?" You know, but I am quite sure you could find the similarity in some of those Seminoles, talking very fast and very choppy, just like you would in the Gullah culture.
Fair enough. That's. I've also seen. I guess Gullah identified as a nation. Is that an idea that? When did you? Is that an idea that
well,
you would
Mark
identify
Wetter
with?
and some group consider it a nation.
Okay.
And that's just, and Cawley, and I used to work with them, and we have said it's not a nation. And, I work with the Gullah code, the Gullah, the National Gullah Commissioner, Gullah Geechee Commissioner.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and they considered it not a nation. But they're, Mark Wetter and her group do consider it, and they consider it a nation.
Okay.
But, it's kind of difficult. It isn't like the Indians, the Native American, because they were here. And I guess another reason why we don't really consider it a nation. But it's a nice concept. Indeed.
Okay, so to backtrack just a little bit, how the enslaved members of your family, how did they obtain their freedom? Did they talk about that at all?
No, I want to tell you, that rice growing thing is a very difficult thing. They've always depicted us on television and with story about cotton plantation, and books. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that you see us do on that plantation is picking cotton, and you singing, and they usually have some little children, black children with raggy clothes on, running around. And that's all. We did nothing. We were like animals, just as work and you work. And that's a difficult thing, and it made it's very painful for years just to see that's all your ancestors did, work at a cotton field. But this country was never built on cotton. This country was built on the knowledge that the Gullah people brought on how to cultivate and process rice and indigo. And that meant that they brought the very best out of Africa. They talked about that because if you, on the rice plantation, you had your coopers. Do you know what tabby is? Tabby is a mixture, that one of the first concrete we use here is a mixture that we brought here of equal amount of water, sand, lime, and oyster shells.
Okay.
You have things around, I saw it yesterday, but he just said it was tabby and not tell us. The guy was extremely good, but that's where tabby came from. We brought that with us. Look it up. It's an African concrete. You see it wherever on coastal area and the Caribbean. Structures. It could be roads, buildings, fence, whatever, made out of tabby. So we came here. You see, they advertise for Negroes in the rice-growing section of Africa that you need the blacksmith. You ever seen a blacksmith on these movies with the cotton or all of it? No. And with those blacksmiths, they came and got them, and they did work in New Orleans, Philadelphia, New York, Boston, all of the big cities. You'd have to talk about all of those skills that we brought here with us. The candle maker, we did everything. And at my museum, we have one of the last black boat builders. How do you think we got to Florida? You can walk through those marshes and whatnot. They either dug the boats out or they built Batu's boat. They knew how when animals go to sleep, because it was the same thing, and knew how to handle, how to get around those things and whatnot. They knew that they could go and get some dog fennel and put it on them and keep them from getting bitten up by mosquitoes and whatnot. And those are the boats, because the water flows this way. They came to Florida. they came by boat. You couldn't walk through those marshland.
Be a pretty tough
In a
walk.
creek. No. So they were boat builders. We came here with all of those skills. And that's what they talk about. How good we are. They would say, we got the thing in our hands. That mean that they could, we did the carving. We did all of this. The sweetgrass basket. These are baskets that they made. They're just decoration, but they were functional things. They made baby cribs out of them. The containers. So we brought all of these things. These are the things that they talked about on the right. It was so different. Then we brought a method of working on the rice plantation, which they call the task system. Mm-hmm. See, that rice culture is very difficult. Whenever your task was completed, you could do what you want to do. That's why the family that Mr. Rifu built the boat, his family has been building boats and trading it with other people who did other things for years. Then we had the people who did the net, and that's all they did. When they finished their task, because that work was a very hard work. Because if a young man came in at 14, probably sometime he'd worked so hard on that rice plantation, by the time he was 25, he would be dead if he wasn't strong enough. And all of these things, and this is why when those Seminoles came here, and the only place I've ever seen a mortar and a pestle is I saw a picture where someone had taken it on a Seminole reservation, a Seminole section of Florida, because it was, when they got there, it was a share thing, and so the African brought the pestle and the mortar. I haven't seen any Native American do that with the pestle and the mortar. And then like they set up all of those, the farming system, and and whatever that you could farm, and not just wait on the mother nature. So, and I think that's why they were very successful. And you got the strength out of Africa. That's why that's a long ways to come from South Carolina all the way to Jacksonville, Florida. And just riding on, a lot of times we were driving on, my daughter, because I was coming from a different direction, 95. But if my husband and we take 17. So that's me. I just love to see nature, and I notice all the rice fields and all the swamps and everything. I love to see that type thing. But when I look at it, and you says, that's how you talk about escape. And that's why a lot of times when I have a presentation, I have one next week, this group come in, at-risk student, and take everything out of I have a small museum, I take everything out of there, and in one room I put 50 children in, turn off the air conditioner. And by this time they're screaming, but it's too hot and it's smelly. But I wanted to sell, I don't care whether they're white or black kids, you have the strength, I'm telling you, you have the strength, your ancestors survived that. I don't want to take them out there to march, because I wouldn't want to go out there myself. But what I do, a little tricky thing with them, and I'm about to pass out too. And I said, they were packed in like sardines. And on a good day, I might bring 2 cans of sardines and open it. I'm about to pass out too, because the sardines are smelling. But they're about to pass out too. But to let people know all the things that we had to survive. And I don't know whether you have, and I know you have never taken a trip down 17.
No.
To see what they had to go through. And that's just the main thing, in those creeks and rivers and whatnot, to get to Florida. And then from Florida to go all the way down into the Caribbean.
Well, so
you've had to be strong.
I'm sure.
Yes.
Did your family tell any stories about the Underground Railroad or anything like that? Did you hear much about it?
They would talk about how enslaved African left the South. But the thing about it, they always, because the books were telling them that they went north. See, but most of them in South Carolina did not go north. We came here. But why would they talk about it? Because they would have to talk about those Seminoles, they call it the Negro War, that America never won. The first two wars, they didn't win because, So this is what they had actually stowed in our head, that they left here when they talked about the Wonder Road, but the people who escaped went north, but they actually didn't. I don't even know whether Florida talks about the Seminole, because I read someplace that the word Seminole means runaway.
Well, I think it's...
And there were all of them, the other nations were coming in and the blacks were coming in.
Yeah.
And it was such a mixture. Wasn't there some big college in Florida called themselves the Seminoles?
Oh, yeah. Florida State.
Yeah, do they realize what... If you think about it. Because, I always say they were like, some Seminoles were all black, some of them were all Indians. Then you had the mixture of black and Indians and so forth. Osceola is buried in Fort Moultrie with his head off in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And they claim that his wife was black, but they said he had many wives. But I know his two second in command were black. And they call themselves the Seminoles. But it is so, you don't know what it is to have this convention, and I hope from it, I will be bringing children into the Jacksonville area, mm-hmm. and even some of the people on the national, there's some group of ladies and people who were dealing with African American history. We will begin to highlight what those Seminoles, or how they came here and what they did. And how brave they were. That's the only thing. They talked about it, but they were right about them run away, but because that was instilled in their mind, because they said they ran up north. Mm. But the ones who ran here gave the United States government a fight for their money, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
Mm-hmm. I told you they bought the very best out of Africa. And we came out of West Africa. A lot of times we're from that Nigeria and Gullah area and whatnot. We always tried to escape how to defend ourselves. And they says, well, why didn't we run away? They brought in so many of us.
No, it was... Did your family talk much about Africa when you were growing up?
I always knew that. Yes. Because I didn't have Dick and Jane books. Mm-hmm. I was going to bring some of those things, but I have to be very careful, and I didn't have my husband with me. And my daughter had a small car. My four books were black books, Negro Boys and Girls. One on third grade book was on the Book of Washington. The fourth grade book was on just all of the people that you could mentor yourselves at. Booker T. Washington was Mary Clyde Bethune, that type thing. Mm-hmm. And then in the back of the book, the last two stories, was a positive story on an African family in Africa. I sold, at age 7 or 8, I was selling the Pittsburgh Courier in the Afro-American newspaper. I'm a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So at 5 years old, I could do a reenactment of Richard Allen. And the reason he started the AME Church, because he was kneeling at the altar and they told him, this is in Philadelphia, St. George Methodist Church, told him he could no longer kneel there because they had built the balcony, and Richard Allen built the balcony because he had brought in so many free slaves into the church and they needed the space. So they built the balcony. So after they got the balcony built, the members told them that Sunday they were kneeling. They said, you have to leave and go in the balcony. And we walked out of the Methodist church, and we've never walked back into the Methodist church. And if you go to Georgetown, where I live, between Georgetown and Charleston, you'll see an AME church on the side of the road. So there are certain areas that we have always, and we've called it African Methodist Episcopal Church. In a certain part of Savannah, Georgia, you have African Baptist Church. So there are certain areas in that Gullah corridor that we have always been proud of who we were and where we were from.
Well, so how would you define Gullah as opposed to Black or African American more generally?
Well, the base is Africa,
Mm-hmm.
but then we've added our own little twists to it when we came to America. So it's a African-based culture, but it was started. The Gullah language probably started in Africa. The culture is when we got here and we had to improvise things, you know. And we didn't bring collard greens here. It was already on American soil. We probably learned that it looks leafy, and the Indian brothers or sisters said, well, yeah, you could eat that. Because we had to depend on the Native American for a lot of things. It's like I said, a lot of us marooned with them in South Carolina. We had started since 1526.
Fair enough.
And it's the same thing with the herbs.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those herbs, and they call them root doctors or whatever, these people were either, I'll consider them chemists or botanists. You had to know when you need to pull something, to boil it, so it wouldn't be, because sometimes things, if you wait for a little while, it's poisonous, if you get it to you, and whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And they had to experiment. They can be killing people.
Mm.
So they learned a lot from the Native Americans. But for some reason, for a very long time, they've had us. Now, I met a Seminole Indian, and then she was, and she said that they got to Florida because of the Under Railroad quilt. Because she was trying to find it, and I was telling her how I found my great-grandfather's cobbler bench. It was given to my father because my father took care of my great-grandfather and his family. Daddy had all of them staying at his home. So before he passed away, he gave his cobbler bench to my father. But I had two grand uncles. One was very close to my dad, the other one wasn't. So one day, the one that was not close to my father sent up there and said that he wanted to repair a pair of shoes, and could he have the cobbler bench? And my other uncle said, don't give it to him, because he always said that it was my daddy, my great-grandfather should have given it to him because he was the oldest son and he should have it. But he didn't think like that, because my father did his whole family a favor. He was giving that to and it was something precious to him because he had enslaved. And we tried to get it back. Every time we tried to get it, my aunt and uncle would say he was still working on a pair of shoes. This went on for years, and then we said, oh, he's not going to give it back to you. And my mother says, right underneath the bed. And then when after he passed away and I came home, and I asked my cousin, and I says, where's Paz cobbler bench? And they says, oh, it's out there in the house, and that little house fell down. And I said, can I go out there? Because I knew it had an iron part to it, and the other part was wood. And I says, I could find the iron part. And they says, oh, I wouldn't know back there if you, because it was, that place is probably full of snakes and whatnot, So one day I was telling another cousin of mine about Pa and that cobbler bench, and she says, I have it. And I said, how do you mean you have it? They had it all that time. Instead of giving it back to my father's family, he gave it to the other uncle's family. So now she gave it back. I have it. But it is in mine. I consider it everybody, all his descendants, because that's the only thing that we have from my ancestors who were slaves on my mother's side, because my grandmother had a lot of things and her house burned down. But even if she had that, we still would have had the metal part. So there are a lot of things and a lot of stories that are still around, and I'm quite sure because I would ask my uncle certain questions, my granduncle, that what my grandfather and other people had said about slavery after I got to be a teenager. When Grandma was just 12, when we were 12, that's when she died, and I was 12 years old, and we were still just listening. It was just an honor to sit in her company, because she was a former slave, and she was blind, and, we'd go and do things for her, and so they would braid her hair, or, Grandma, would you want some water? I guess she probably got tired of us, and we just pampered her, yes. But the only thing that they just said how awful slavery was, and some of the things that they had to do, it was something that they wanted to block out of their mind. Because see, that rice, this is time of the year, they are out there and they drain that field, so they're working in that, rice has an odor to it. You got a lot of flies. And then when you were cutting that rice down, like about in October, you were dealing with some of the vicious reptile. You had water moccasin, which is a territorial snake. And when you would cut it down with stock rice, when you're picking it up, you could get bitten by a rat and a diamondback rattle at that time. Those rice fields were full of diamondback rattles because they were in there looking for the mice and whatnot. And then, if you, I'm still in Florida, in the fall, it's a haze about this high, and you couldn't see it. So, you had Brother Alligator in the field looking for everybody. So these are the conditions on which they worked under for over 200 years, made this country. There were 13 wealthy men in colonial America. 9 of them live in Georgetown County. The money is still there. Those plantations, see, most of those plantations are still there in Georgetown. And it was such hard work. That's why we told them about the task system. We brought that form of working. Whenever your task was completed, you could do what you want to do. That's why some people would farm, they would go hunting, build boats, fish nets, or whatever.
So growing up, did you feel some of the legacy of that 9 wealthy men in that county, I guess, in terms of...
No, you didn't feel it any, because as soon as they stopped growing the rice, they brought in the timber, because they always came down there, because we taught them, like I told them today, open land grazing. That was the first time the word cowboy was used is in South Carolina. Because see, there are 4 things that made colonial America rich. It was rice, indigo, open land grazing, and the naval stores. Because once we taught them not to just keep your animals fenced in and all puny and whatnot, just open land grazing, then they would let 2 or 3 people watch them. And instead of them calling them cattlemen, they called them cowboys, because they were watching the what? Cows. See, it wasn't first used in the West, cowboys. It was coined right in South Carolina. Then, when they started open land grazing, the Yankees had enough money, enough meat to take. They had more than they need in New England to take over to the Caribbean. See, you always had this Caribbean connection. So they sold it to the plantation owners over there. So they had more money to buy trinkets to bring back more enslaved Africans.
Interesting. If I might ask, so what kinds of foods did you eat in your family growing up?
A lot of green leafy vegetables, because a lot of things that we could eat, like, kale, cabbage, a lot of turnip greens, because South Carolina a lot of times were warm, and you could make rows of turnip green every 3 weeks. And finish one, you go to the other one, and we ate either 1, 2, or 3 meals out of the ocean. of the creek, of the river. So that was mainly what we ate. We had a very good diet, and even during slavery time, they had their own garden because they had the tax system, so they had their own gardens. They didn't have to wait, like I guess on the cotton plant, until someone gives you whatever they're supposed to give you. And when you live on the coast, I mean, what more do you want? You know, you got oysters, you got all the fish, you got clams, you have shrimp.
Who caught those things in your family for the table? Just
My
anyone?
daddy didn't, but he had some friends that were fishermen. And then he had some other friends that in the country brought everything wild that they could think about. And we had alligator hunters, but the only thing the Gullah people would eat at that time on alligator would be the tails. Because the guys would come and go into the creek and they would catch the alligators. And they weren't interested in the meat. They were just interested in their hide.
Oh. That's...
And then we had a lot of turtles. At that time, we would have sea turtles tied up in the backyard. That when you were a little kid, you could just get on their back and ride them.
Would have been interesting.
Right. So, see, as they were coming to Florida, the Seminole, you had all of these things you could catch. You know, you got your turtle. We never say turtle. We call them kuda. Kuda. It's an African word, kata. You know, so they were used to eating these things. You know? Yeah. And as far as herbal medicine, they know a lot of the herbal things that you see, plants, you know, those things, we call them elephant ear, where they could eat the bottom of those and thicken the soups and what. So they knew all of these things. They learned some so when they were traveling, they got to Florida and they didn't have to starve. They didn't have to catch the wild games, and they were just used to eating everything out of the creek and the river.
Yeah, no, it sounds like they were pretty well set up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Deborah, gone pretty soon. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Well, and so you kept a garden, I guess, when you were growing up?
We always had a garden on the side of the house.
And what did you grow in there? That was the turnip greens and all that stuff?
The turnip greens. We had a lot of, Daddy had we grew a lot of carrots and beets, sweet potatoes, and with the beets and the carrots, you know, they grow in the winter. They like that winter, that coldness, you know. You just pull it up and go to the pump and up and down, wash it up and eat it, you know. You could do the same thing with potatoes. Go and pull it up and sweet potatoes and eat it. That's one of the things that we brought over here. Then we had to buy rice because they had stopped growing rice, and you know, so they bought their rice. And we had rice every day because the African believed that rice is the foundation of life. So you can get married to a Gullah Geechee man if you want to. I don't care what you put on that plate, but you better have some rice. And this is why we throw rice on you when doing weddings, because it is the foundation of life. And they believe that if a marriage gets real slow, just add some red pepper to the rice and spice things up. And I was surprised yesterday, but they had rice on the plate today. Because Gullah Geechee, we have rice every day. Yeah. We rice eating people.
Fair enough. So what about the some of the remedies, the medicinal herbs and things?
Well, I have. I didn't bring any Spanish moss because I knew it was down here, so I pulled some off when I do my little thing. Do you know what Spanish moss is used for? It is used for high blood pressure. Gullah people believe you can pull it off of the tree. Do not let it touch the ground. You cure it naturally. That means you put it in the oven for about 5 minutes, about 250 degrees. And what it does is if a little bug or anything is on it, it's dead. You take small pieces off and put it at the heel of your shoes. Now, a chemist came in, and she was an herbalist, and she said the same ingredients in the high blood pressure medication is in the Spanish moss. Now, what we have, it's another one that everybody uses. It's Life Everlasting Tea. I brought some of that with me, too. And it's a tea that I guess it was used in Africa too, because some things come through the ships and, different to get from one place to the other, the same thing, plant. And you use that, you boil it, and you could use, some people use different type of alcohol on it, you don't. I just boil it as a tea and I keep it sometime in the refrigerator, and I use it for colds and coughs and flu and fever and whatnot. Then I have, the guys used to crush it up. You'd have to smell it. And then they roll it up in the brown paper, and they call it rabbit tobacco. The Indians have been using smoking rabbit tobacco for years. So I guess they taught the Gullah people how to smoke it as rabbit tobacco, okay? Then I have snake root. I use that as an herbal tea. Too, and the snake root, Gullah folks said you could steep it on corn liquor for 3 months. 3 months now. And you could use it for anything that ail you. And if the corn liquor doesn't get you, the snake root will. Then I have the burrs from off of the sycamore tree. If you burn it and you have a burn, you use the residue on your skin, and it helps to heal it. And the ones that they use, we do spider webs too. If you have cuts, put the spider webs in the cut. Put some fat meat on the top of it, a penny, a quarter. Tie your bandage your arm, the wound up, and take it off in about 2 weeks. And you better thank God that it isn't a school time because it smells real bad. But when you take it off, you don't have any scar and it's healed. We also have, what else did I bring with me? What did I put the snake root? Oh yeah, mullein. We use that for headache. It sort of looked like a wild tobacco plant. We came 95, so I couldn't, a lot of times when I'm traveling, through the small places, I could just stop on the side of the road and pull these things up. Right. And we just have all kinds of things that we used. And some of them, the Indians told us what to use and how to use them and whatnot. It was actually a share thing when it came to the herbs and spices. And all of us knew, like a Gullah woman, know that she'd have to, when she looked for herbs and spices, you'd better find some wild honey. Because those things sometimes are very, very, very bitter. I know that snake root, the aroma, it smells so nice, you'd think, but I'm telling you, it is so bitter. Then we made Lye Soap, and we did the soap for a lot of things. A lot of people, even men, would even use the Lye Soap to go fishing, because when the fish see the bubble at the end, they're going to come and see what's going on. So there are a lot of home remedies that we use. Hoehound tea, hoehound, some of these things are just out there in the wild. And we, as people had stopped growing these things, when I came back home, because I was away, I've been back in South Carolina for 14 years, this old lady gave me some. So I planted in my daddy's yard where he had the chicken coop. And I went back there about a month after, and I couldn't tell the difference between the hoehound and the weed. I should have put it in a container. But all of these things, you go and buy them at the health food store, and you don't have to buy them at the health food store. It costs a lot of money, and then you have to listen to those people at the health food store that says, "Hi, how are you?"
Is there anywhere special you go to gather these things, or you just anywhere you can find them?
I don't gather them, but I have somebody, some people who are native to the island, because a lot of things you can't find on the side of the road because they keep cutting it down, so they have to go. And then there's some things like the snake root, it grows near like a little swampy area when it's always damp, and then certain things you have to pull at a certain time. Life everlasting tea, you do that because it dries up in the fall of the year.
I see. Well, and you said so the Spanish moss can't touch the ground while you're gathering it. Are there any other similar kinds of prescriptions?
In the Western, in the Caribbean, they do a moss, but it isn't. They boil it. It's not like the Spanish moss here. They boil it. Yes.
Okay.
I have a group of things that I just brought some of the simple things with me, but I have a book there with all of, what you could do with all of the herbs and the spices, and I also have, I think I had one bag of rock candy left. What they would do would soak it in either camphor or cone liquor. When you have a sore throat, they would just give you like a teaspoonful of that rock candy and cone liquor.
Mm-hmm.
Burn your throat up.
I bet.
Yes. So I'd have to think about some of the things that I have.
I see. Are there any holidays or celebrations specific to where you grew up that you could talk about? Anything like that?
No, other than our standard holidays,
Okay.
Christmas and Easter. We never did 4th of July in my day. It didn't mean anything to us. We had not gotten our freedom, and you don't know what it is to stand in front of a classroom and says, "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, for which it stands." You don't know what it is, and those are the things that we had to go through. So we never really celebrate the 4th of July.
I see.
But we did Christmas, and we made things out of just, Daddy would send us out there in the woods, and we'd always get one of those Charlie Brown Christmas tree, which he kept sending us out there. And I think he was only getting pieces of scrap wood so he could start his wood stove with it because it smelled good and whatnot. And then we made wreaths out of different things, the pine cone, and now we do the popcorn. I don't know what it's at the end of in the fall. It's a little berry. It's green now, and then it drops off, and and it looks all white. So then we do decorations with the popcorn. We did, those things for homemade things for things of nature that we could use. And the Indians used the popcorn. They would usually boil it, and it's some type of oil that came up, and you could use it for light, for like you use kerosene and whatnot. So you probably, it's because those popcorn trees are usually where they have the brackish water. They love the brackish water. So I'm quite sure they're up and down because I've gone out to Texas and, I've seen them growing out there, the popcorn trees. So you probably never noticed them.
Yeah.
But right now the berries are on them and they're all green. And then about in the fall, who knows when, I don't know when you have fall here. Then they turn black. And what I do sometime, I know when to take it off and I'll put it where the sun is. So they'll just open. And then if I really, because you can't open them that early because then it isn't as white as it should be because you want it to look like a popcorn,
I see.
And you use the pine needles too, the long stem pine. You could boil those and use that for colds and coughs and flu and whatnot. So just a group of things that,
Yeah, sounds that way. Do people still use the popcorn for decorations and stuff?
Oh yeah, that's pretty big during Christmas time. Yeah, I couldn't bring any of that. I would take, like I said, the van was out of order, and it's just that,
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And then I didn't have the space. I mean, I probably could use it to exhibit it on one of the days, but I just bought some of the herbs in a small container.
I see. Well, we've run through most of the sheet I was given. I understand you also make quilts.
Yeah, I do story quilts.
I don't know if you'd like to talk about that at all. Or...
I do story quilts. We have one that I have right now is the Department of Art and Embassy have that one in Angola. I'll show you a picture of it when I get up.
Okay.
And we've done Michelle Obama's story. Her ancestors are out of Georgetown, South Carolina. And right now I have a group of people, and we're trying to purchase the plantation that her ancestors came on, because we want to use it as an institution. So I made the Michelle Obama quilt, and then the title of the quilt, I have a picture of it. I got to find something to put it up. The one, and it is an original quilt, because that's, it's a large quilt. But I had a group of second graders and special needs students to make a small one that I usually bring around with me. And the title of that one is From the Slave Cabin to the White House. Wow. So when you go back, you could take it, either bring it up here and take a picture of it.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what I like to do, story quilt. I do the Underground Railroad quilt. And like a lot of people, the first thing is the monkey wrench. It tells you to get your tools together so that we get able to travel. And then the next one is a wheel, because everybody was going north. But on my Underground Railroad quilt, I have a ship. I have a boat, because you're heading south. So it's a little different. And then I might have, the one block with just a bunch of alligators and other stuff that, these are all the things that you had to go through coming down to Florida. And then I usually bright colors, because, Florida is such a sunshine. It's the sunshine state. So I do that with my Underground Railroad quilt. My daughter says, "Mommy, are you going to make another one?" And I says to come down. But it was, when they invited me, the time was too short for me to do it. And this one, I have one, it's already, I have a design and everything. And this one, the first one I made, well, he ended it up in Florida, but from Florida, he ended up as a Buffalo Soldier, because he went on the Trail of Tears. But this one, I wanted to have two people in the center, which is one person, a Buffalo Soldier in the center. The next one is going to have a Seminole, and I decided not to use, my husband says I'm just partial, but I'm going to use a Gullah and a Seminole lady in the center. Because I think sometimes they talk about the males all the time.
Yeah.
And I have an Amistad quilt, so I have a man in the center, Sincade. Yes, yeah. And he was from a rice-growing area of Africa. Yeah, that's my main passion. I do Gullah toys too, but I like to do the story quilts.
How did you get started on story quilts?
Well, I'm a home economics major.
Okay.
I've been out of the field for a long time. So doing other things, not this. I got out of the field a long time ago. And I've always been a history buff. And someone says, well, none of my friends, they hadn't seen me, and I says, well, I thought you majored in history. I said, well, they never hired but 2 history teachers at a school. And so I had better sense to major in history if I wanted to teach. So my other thing was I always did things, and a lot of Gullah people do. We do things with our hands, So we got to So I love history, and that's what I started doing. If I did a craft, it has something cultural with it. We have hand puppets, and a lot of people don't realize in Africa they always use an awful lot of puppets, even the marionette puppets. Because when you see a puppet, you think of the European thing. But see, everything started in Africa. And even if you look, some of the Africans who do the acrobats and whatnot, and changing and doing mystical and magical things and whatnot. So it's always something that has to do with a cultural thing.
Interesting. Were there a lot of puppets around you growing up or anything like that, or some of the toys you make? Or
No. I was always making things, and he was always throwing my junk out.
Oh.
Always bringing in flowers in the house, and my mother kept me from bringing in lizards, because she says that if you brought a lizard in, she says don't fool around with a lizard, because a lizard would wet on you and will turn you into a little boy. And I didn't. So I didn't want to be a little boy, so I left the lizards outside. But she didn't know I used to play with these hog-nosed snakes. They're little harmless snakes, because if they feel a vibration come over, they just turn over on their backs like they were dead, Yeah, I was always playing or doing something.
Oh, it sounds like it. That's the good stuff.
Yeah, the good stuff. If I see a snake now, I'd probably run like it. Well, I did. My nephew came, and my sister says, Bunny knows where all the snake holes are, because we lived by this canal. We used to call it a big ditch. At that time, I did not know that it was a rice canal. That's what it was. We'd go back there and call it the big ditch. It was a canal. And it had holes, and that's where the snakes, we knew the snakes would run in, and we'd take a long stick and go in and get out, put it. And so I went down. I think I was a sophomore then, and I said, sure, I'll show you where the snake's holes are. We went down, and a snake stuck his head out, and I was like that. And then I realized my snaking days were over. Yeah, we just made use of everything that was around us.
I guess so. Well, I think...
Is my hour up?
I think our hour is probably up.
A long time ago?
Possibly.
Oh, I better get out of here. I'm not fooling around with you.
Yeah. But thank you very much for doing
Well,
this interview.
I hope you got something from it.